Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's SLAM seminar. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sumit Sinha, who's today's speaker. He's currently a postdoctoral researcher at Harvard, working with Mahadevan, and he got his PhD at University of Texas at Austin, studying theoretical and computational studies of growing tissues, for which he received the ACS Graduate Award in Theoretical Chemistry. So he's going to tell us today about his work on patterns and function in optimal control of living matter. And with that, Sumit, take it away.
Uh, Thank you all for joining. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Professor Beller for giving me this opportunity, and also all the members of the SLAM committee. Let me introduce myself. I'm Sumit Sinha. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in applied mathematics at Harvard, working with Mahadevan. So today I'll be talking mostly about some of my recent work, which, even though they are recent, I've been thinking about this problem for a very, very long time. And this is about from patterns to function, about Hamiltonian bridges for optimal control of living matter. So there might be some jargons here and there, and if something is not clear, please let me know. And all these jargons should be clear as we proceed on to the talk. Thank you very much. Let's begin. Okay, so as we are living in these current times, I want to ask a question which is kind of pertinent, which is about so on the left side, you have a digital brain. It's some kind of a computational machine. And on the right side, you have active matter experiments. Active matter experiments, as you know, they're non-equilibrium and they range from many scales. In this representative example, you have a space-time domain, which is generally called a tumor. And this is embedded in a viscoelastic matrix. So the experimentalist, which is a human, which is also a state of matter, is trying to design an experiment such that the interfacial instabilities on the tumor is suppressed. So there is a function when the experimentalists, they are trying to do these biological experiments, they want to prevent something from happening so that your spatiotemporal behavior of a domain, an active domain, is the way it is. So can we ask a question like this? Can we design a computational machine which performs goal-oriented functional experiments in soft and active matter? Because you can ask this question because the human being who's doing an experiment, he or she himself is a state of matter, evolved through billions and billions of years of evolution. So it's a matter-matter interaction where one is a very highly evolved object and the other one is also a highly evolved object. But then due to the brain of the human being, they can do these functional experiments. So I hope the premise of this question is clear. So now can we ask another question? Can brute force AI do it? Not at this moment of time, because these soft matter experiments live in the data scarce regime. So, so now can physics and AI do it? So this is the premise of the talk that I'll be talking about. So combination of physics and AI together can in principle do these kind of tasks. So let's begin. And this is the outline of the talk. As to why do we care about how and why of optimal control of living matter, then I'll give you a high-level conceptual picture about this topic, because generally this optimal control and stochastic optimal control is not taught in the physics department. It's a topic in applied mathematics. And then I'll give you some properties, some things about the theories and algorithms and some numerical experiments. Mostly they will be about microscopic optimal control problem, which is much more like microscopic statistical physics. And then how do you coarse grain these theories in a manner so that you get macroscopic optimal control problem? And then this will be called the Hamiltonian bridge. And then I'll tell you how do you solve this macroscopic optimal control problem through a computational technique, Lagrangian, Eulerian macro loop, and then some numerical toil examples which are pertinent in soft matter, soft and active matter. And then I'll give you some summary as to what is the achievement and limitation of this work. And then I'll tell you about how do you use this Hamiltonian bridges in reality. And two representative examples will be wound healing, and which is done in collaboration with the experimentalists at Princeton, and then something about RNA patterning done in collaboration with experiments at Johns Hopkins. And then I'll try to tell you as to why this is if you scale the Hamiltonian bridges, you can, in principle, embody these experiments which can be automated in some sense. And also, I'll also tell you some recent work that I'm trying to do as to how can you parameterize these functionals as graph neural nets. So basically, this is going to be a combination of physics experiments and AI all in one framework. So let's begin. Let's begin with the introduction as to why do we care about optimal control of living matter? So why should we why should we think about these problems? So matter, these active matters are very evolved objects. They have functional properties, like they are goal oriented and they are functional. So function can be, just like I said, you want to design some experiments, or maybe you want to plan your life in some sense. And then this give rise to many effective theories, which a lot of theorists in the physics department kind of think about. And then we know that the breakdown of this function can in principle lead to many diseases. Now, how these experiments are traditionally done. So let me give you an example of this experiment. So on this, as I showed this before as well, so on this left, you have an elastic matrix, and on the right-hand side, you have a solid matrix. And the experimentalist has to do a lot of trials and errors to design this experiment so that the functionality of this region of space-time is governed. So in this case, the decision variable that the experimentalist has to worry about is like the cross-linker concentration, which basically is a thing so that they can actually change the rheological properties of the environment so that the tumor is behaving in a manner which is useful to the human body. And this experiment is done through lots of trials and errors. Now, can we do something about it so that we can do these experiments, even though this is goal directed? Can we make a machine which is much more precise than the human being and can actually work in these high dimensional cases so that these experiments can be done much faster and much more quicker in some sense? So this is where you should think about these theories that I'm going to talk about. This is going to be about theories and theoretical and computational frameworks of optimal control. This is a very rich field in applied mathematics. This is a very well-established field done through the 1960s and 1970s of mathematicians like Pontryagin and Bellman. However, this is not generally taught in applied mathematics. This is generally not taught in the physics department, but this is very pertinent because in active matter, we are dealing with non-equilibrium systems, which itself can be living objects. So therefore, these theories which were developed for maybe goal-oriented machines are very pertinent to the theories of active matter. And also, this is a very deep connection to generative AI. It has deep connections to stochastic optimal control, statistical physics, and reinforcement learning. And because of these machines, these are computational machines, these are goal-directed machines, and like human beings. And this, in principle, can give rise to automated and accelerated experiments when coupled to to design like functional materials. So this is the premise as to
Sorry, can I just ask a quick clarification question? So
yeah.
What's the difference between elastic and solid? Because to me, an elastic is also...
Oh, sorry. It's a liquid matrix. It should be liquid, okay?
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Okay. So this is the premise. So, okay, so now just to give you a visual picture as to how you should think about these problems. So imagine you have a domain on which you have a passive vector field, which is given by the gradient of a systematic interaction, which looks like these blue colored lines. What you want to do, Z is a state space, and then you want to drive it to some goal, which is Z of t. Now, just for illustration, this is like a point, but in actual mathematics, these will be some objects in function spaces. So this is Z of t, and then you have Z of target. This is where you want to drive. So you want to find a signal. This signal is actually can be achieved in an experiment because you're perturbing the domain. So in the previous experiment, the experimentalist has to perturb the domain using the cross-linker concentration. So that's a signal in space-time. So you want to perturb the space-time in a manner so that you achieve your target. And that's the whole premise of optimal control as to how do you design the signal U so that you actually achieve your target, which is in some abstract space. But then when you do these experiments, these actually are in the form of like, it has to have some function. So this is the premise, and this is the high dimensional picture, high level picture that you should think of. And these are determined.
Are we imagining that these control variables are going to be tuned during the time of the experiment, or are they fixed in each experiment?
They can be tuned. So it can be in a loop as well. But for the simplicity, I'm just talking about. So let's say you have a very big time horizon of an experiment. You can divide that time horizon into multiple sub-time horizons, and then you can discretize that static control. That on that time horizon, you can do a single control problem. But then once that is solved, you go on to the other level. So that problem can itself be changing during your experiment. So these problems generally are solved using method of adjoints, and this is for people in the audience who are interested, they can read this tutorial. So this is an example of deterministic systems, which in statistical physics is called an athermal system, which has zero temperature fluctuations. There's no fluctuation in the system, but then we know that in statistical physics or in microscopic picture of reality, there is fluctuation. So we need to extend these frameworks to stochastic regime, and that's where much of the algorithm development that I'll be talking about will be living in. So now so hopefully this conceptual picture as to what we are trying to do is clear. If not, I'll pause for a bit, and then if you have some questions, you can ask. I'll pause for like 10 seconds or something. If it's all clear, then I'll proceed. Okay. So now I'll go into the heavy machinery development of these algorithms, which I've developed over the past few years. And then let me begin that. So, okay. So generally, if you think of many of the problems in biology, proteins or where many people have thought about protein folding and all those kind of things, and those are also, when you perturb that proteins as well, those also become active. Those are generally given in microscopic pictures where you have on a domain, you have some degrees of freedom, generally given as for representation, I will call them positional degrees of freedom so that you have a picture in mind. And then there is a scalar function, which is generally called a systematic interaction, and the gradient of which gives you a force. But then there is also, and then you have fluctuations, which is given by xi of t, and then there is some control that you want to figure out. This is not given to you a priori. This is an experimentalist trying to figure out what should I do. So these are the variables in the problem. You have, and so if the embedding space is 3D, so you will have 3 n-dimensional degrees of freedom, and then you have u, which you want to find out, and then you have xi. And then what you want to do is to minimize. And how do I find this? You will have to solve some kind of a minimization problem, and you can think of this minimization in terms of minimizing the work or something like that. But then this can be a general, for statistical perspective, this can be written like minimization of some work done, but this is a much more, you can generalize this to any kind of a control. So the mathematics remains invariant. So this is like you want to minimize the work, and then this psi function, which is the capital psi, you want to reach at some target state at x of t. So what you want to do, you want to drive the system in a manner so that you achieve your configuration, your target, which can be parameterized in terms of your configuration space x of t. So this is the problem that we want to solve. Okay. So I don't know you a priori. So note, if I can do this, this can give rise to many things. This can help you design automated experiments. It can also help you design automated physics, automated computation, or simulations of physical systems. Because generally, when you have to simulate the physical system, you know the event that has already happened. So you know some kind of a goal in your head. So this has a very what do you say? This has a very rich kind of a consequences in some sense.
So in order to go from the experiment to this framework, we have to have a metric on the space of experimental parameters?
Yeah. So let's say you want to do some kind of let's say in this example, right, that I was trying to show you, in this case, if you discretize this simulation, right, in terms of particles, you will have a phase field model where the degrees of freedom will carry some information about the phase field as well as the positional degrees of freedom. And what you want to minimize is the gradient of the phase field phi. So that's the metric that you should think of. So you should have a goal in your experiment. Is that clear?
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So now, as I said, the mathematics of this is well established. However, the computational machinery is not well established. So what is the mathematics? So the mathematics is the optimal u, which is a spatial, which is a function u of t comma x is given by a gradient of a scalar function, which is generally called a value function. You can think of it as a free energy function. What does this mean? So on the space-time manifold of x and t, you release control trajectories of x from some x, which is equal to this, and then you release some control trajectories, and the expectation of those paths, the control paths, will give you the value function. Now what you happen is, when you take this problem and then you use Fokker-Planck picture of this and do adjoints, and then you construct a Lagrange multiplier of that Fokker-Planck equation, this will give you a backward equation, which is called the Hamilton-Jacobi PDE. This is a nonlinear PDE, and this PDE is in very high dimensions. Now, in order to solve this, so in order to access U, you need to solve this PDE, which is a very high dimensional PDE. Now, you cannot solve high dimensional PDEs very easily. Therefore, you need to do some tricks. So the first trick is to linearize this PDE using Kohlhoff transformation. And then, because once it becomes linearized, you can use the Feynman-Path integral formula of that the whole system now can be represented through uncontrolled paths. So instead of solving the PDE on the entire domain, you will be solving the PDE on paths. So this is called method of characteristics. This is a generalization of method of characteristics to PDEs. So what you do is that now the value function f of t comma x will now just become the paths that you're releasing, which are uncontrolled, and you compute the e to the power minus beta, some kind of a Boltzmann factor, through the uncontrolled paths, and therefore you get some kind of a value, the scalar function f of t comma x. Now you note that you don't need f, you need u star of x, u stars, which is the optimal control. So I need to take the gradient of this object. This is a very non-trivial step in computation, and therefore you have to use some kind of a sensitivity method so that you can compute the sensitivity of a local object. So note that you have to perturb some t comma x so that you get a response at x of capital T. So you need to do some kind of a sensitivity which is non-local in space-time. And that's what I created in this method, which is called the adjoints. What it does is that you release
Sumit, sorry,
yeah.
1 second. I have a question about the previous slide. Yes. Clarification, actually. So the Kohlhoff simplification, the linearization, that's only true for quadratic cost functions, right?
Yeah, so this is only true for quadratic. So whatever I'll be talking as the algorithm development is only going to be for quadratic cost. But then this method of adjoints is very general. What will happen is that it will not. So in those cases, what will happen is that the adjoint or the Lagrange multiplier will not be given as some u of grad of something like that. You will have to generalize that technique, but then that mathematics becomes super non-trivial. So I will not be talking about that.
Sorry.
Okay. But you can still do that. So there is. Okay, I need to say something about that. So the thing is, even though those methods cannot be, you cannot formally derive it, but then the method of adjoints is a very general technique. And the recent computations like JAX and all those kind of things can give you free adjoints by discretization of the computational graph. Therefore, you can do those calculations without doing these formal mathematics.
Right. Sorry, I just want to follow up, and I should have asked before, but my dog was barking. About the path and the formulation. In practical, even before that, doesn't any one of those perfect. In practical terms, anyone who has done living on soft matter experiments, you generally don't have the luxury of having a trajectory that you follow. You almost de novo reboot the system and start again. Let's say the boundary conditions, the elasticity of the substrate. So you don't have initial conditions that are, in a sense, backward relevant, because you start a new state. The Z0 is always as if you started everything again, even though you changed the parameters. So could you just comment on how would you deal with that? Or if you actually chose to follow this regime, how would you deal with the fact that your boundary conditions or your initial conditions have changed as the trajectory progresses?
So, okay, so whatever you are thinking about is absolutely correct in an experimental sense. But the thing is, when I go to the experiment, this point will be clear. So the thing is, you don't solve one single optimal control problem. When you connect it to an experiment, you will be solving optimal controls on the fly, and the feedback of the experiment will update the model on itself. Okay. So whenever something you change, like the boundary conditions, initial conditions, those will automatically have to be updated. That problem has to be updated on the fly.
Very good. I should have known better, but sorry, interrupted you.
So that's the whole point. So you're absolutely correct that when you have to update the system, the formulation of the problem has to be updated again. But then, because of the recent advancements in computational techniques, that update step can be automated as well. So therefore, you will be in a loop with a machine and the experiment.
Perfect. Thank you again.
Okay, so this is the thing that I was talking about. So just to tell you what it does is that whenever you have xtk minus 1, let's say you have a control path, to take the next step, you forward propagate uncontrolled paths, and then this adjoint sensitivity, which gives you a backward equation, which is the generalization of your backpropagation for PDEs and spatiotemporal methods. This is why modern machine learning is also based on. This is on computers, when you do backpropagation, those are discrete adjoints. This is the continuous adjoint. This is the continuous backpropagation in spacetime. So this gives you the response field, and it carries the sensitivity, and then you can update your U star of tk, and then you take a step again. So this is how this machine works. And note, many companies like Meta and all those kind of people also have done similar kind of work after we released this work. However, we did not have the computing resources as Meta and all those people, so maybe the reviewers were not happy with us or something like that. Okay, so this is how this method was developed. So now you understand that this method is for, this is a microscopic degree of freedom, which is basically, if you think in terms of mathematical sense, these are Lagrangian degrees of freedom, which are embedded in 3D space. Okay, so now I want to go to, now I will take a jump from going from the microscopic picture to the macroscopic picture, where generally you go from coarse graining of the statistical mechanics to thermodynamics in some sense. And those imaging techniques that you see are generally in these variables. Okay, so what do we have? This is a PDE, and these PDEs generally arise in your phase separating systems, and generally for any continuum conservation, and these are systems which conserve your conservation laws of scalar fields. So for simplicity, I'll be taking this phi, the scalar field defined on a spatiotemporal domain t comma z, and they have flux, where v is a field that you know the physics of. It can be a gradient of a free energy functional, and then u is a function that you don't know, r is a reaction field that you know, and s is a reaction field that you don't know. And you also know the initial and the terminal case. Note, this terminal condition is what the experimentalist is trying to achieve. And then they also have an initial condition. And then there is some minimization. This minimization is in the form of the flux minimization as well as the reaction minimization. And then you do this minimization, and you can do some mathematics. And the mathematics is very standard. You basically have to construct a variational form, which is a Lagrangian, and then you have to vary all the functions, and then you will get these kind of conditions. And this is the primal, in the technical language, this is called the primal optimization problem. This is the dual variable problem, and this dual problem actually has a Hamiltonian structure. It's like a symplectic structure, and therefore this follows, and this is the bridge between the initial and the terminal. That's what this is called, a Hamiltonian bridge. And then, just to tell you, complete the story, this U star and this S star is given as the gradient of these adjoint variables. And then this is basically what you study in classical mechanics, that these have Poisson structure, Poisson bracket structure, and these have symplectic geometry. And just to complete, so this is why this is called a Hamiltonian bridge when you go to the thermodynamic limit. Okay,
Sorry,
so now
I feel like that was important, but it went by fast for me. So it's a bridge between the initial and the final states?
Yeah, so when this lambda 0 is the constraint, the Lagrange multiplier corresponding to the phi 0 and the phi star. So it will connect two bridges. And there are 2 time points. So it's acting as a bridge between the two conditions at the end, at the initial and the final. Therefore, it acts as a bridge. It's a generalization of something called the Schrodinger bridge that generally people do in generative AI. And in that case, you have the Fokker-Planck as the scalar field. So this is the generalization to a scalar field, but in a thermodynamic sense. if that makes sense.
Somewhat. So it's a condition on the endpoints of the path you're about to solve for through parameter space.
So this lambda is a Lagrange multiplier, which is a function that you introduce by hand so that you can construct a Lagrangian. And then because of this, this carries the information of the adjoints, and they act as bridges between these two endpoints. They have this, when you do this variation, you will see that they are written like this. And then this is a bridge and then what you can do, so you have a domain on which these two equations live. You have the phi field and the lambda field, and you have to solve them concurrently such that this minimization happens. Is that clear?
We can come back to it at the end if it doesn't. Yeah.
So just to say that this is the, if you read about the literature on Schrodinger bridges, it will be clear. It's the dual variational problem of that. If you read the literature on Gen AI.
So maybe to again maybe clarify a little bit on that point. So if you added noise, so this was deterministic dynamics,
Yeah.
right? If you added Gaussian noise to the same thing, then this should be the Schrodinger bridge problem, right?
Yeah, but then you have to do Schrodinger bridge in function spaces because
Sure.
now
Yeah,
so
not
that,
not on not on
yeah.
paths themselves. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes.
So those will be paths in some function space.
Function. Yes. Okay.
So okay, so now we have to solve this. Instead of creating a new machine, actually we created this machine in a different paper, but then we can use the same picture, and then you can have a consistent framing from going just like you go from microscopic to macroscopic techniques. So what you have is that you have a pattern forming PDE, which is the one that I introduced. You can use Lagrangian variables, and you can convert this PDE into a bunch of ODEs through the smooth particle hydrodynamics, which is generally used in astrophysics. And then you can construct the Lagrangian dynamics out of these PDEs, and then you again get back to the same problem that you were talking about before, and then you can use the APIC algorithm in this manner, where you have the microscopic degrees of freedom, and you coarse grain through these some Gaussian kernels. Generally, you have many kernels in SPH, and then you can construct a macroscopic field. You forward propagate, compute error, backpropagate using the adjoint method that I just said, and then you can control these paths. So this is how you have a consistent machinery going from microscopic to macroscopic, and it's a very important thing because if your experiment has a scale-dependent operation, you don't need two different levels of description. You only need one level of description, and you have a single machine that can do everything. And you can actually extend this into different frameworks of renormalization as well as Landau machine kind of thing, coarse graining, where S is now a variable itself that you tune. So if you build on this work, you can make a machine like that as well.
So I have another question, Sumit, about the micro to macro coarse graining. How do you so you implicitly said that your microscopic degrees of freedom, you're making some choice for it's a discretization or representation of the continuous fields, and so you have to make a choice on how many degrees of freedom you specify.
That depends on the amount of money you have.
Okay, so but you could do is everything that you're going to say going to be in a situation where all the degrees of freedom microscopically that you're going to represent and then smooth out are going to be controlled, or are you also going to talk about sort of sub-Riemannian kind of controls where you have or you have mismatch between the number of degrees of freedom you use to represent the field and the number of and some fraction of them that you actually control?
No, so in this case, you can do that, but in this case, we applied it on, as far as I remember, we applied it on all of them. But you can actually do this as well. You can coarse grain it onto a mid-scale and then use control on that and then project it back. So as what you are saying, that will also hold true. But I think I think we did both or single one. I don't remember.
Is there also a question regarding potentially now add on another optimization layer on top of this on asking what's the optimal set of degrees of freedom you need to represent for a given task? So if
exactly, I mean, there are many variables that you can optimize for. But then the problem is that writing closed form solutions for all these variables will be non-trivial, and then what can happen is that you might not be able to derive the mathematics, and then the mapping to the experiment will be hard because the experiment might be completely different kind of a framework. So there are different tricks that you can do for that. So instead of relying on doing everything by pen and paper, there are other ways to do this as well, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking in terms of pen and paper. What I was trying to see if there was a way of getting to problems of for the degrees of freedom problem, like Bernstein problem, wherein, is there a framework in which you can ask, knowing some final task and knowing that you have, some final goal that you want to accomplish?
Yeah.
Are there situations wherein you need, for an optimal solution within this framework, that you naturally need some amount of redundancy, or in the description, in how you discretize a system, or you don't, and depending
I mean,
on
there has to be, because if you discretize, I mean, if you have a function on a domain and you discretize it only with like few degrees of freedom, then the function will not be represented properly, and that's why the whole game of like FEM, SPH, and all those things happen into the picture, right? So this is a good question, but then if you want like a very highly number of, because these calculations are very compute intensive, I a priori do not know, like how would you choose a problem, how would you know a priori for a living system, how would you do that? But then instead of relying on those kind of things, you should be updating your models on the fly. That's what I feel, rather than sticking to some fixed mathematical problem and then then worrying about these kind of problems. That's what I feel, but I might be wrong.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now these are the two frameworks. So what you have till now is a consistent framework of mathematics, of computational machinery, where you can do these kind of macro micro loop, and you can do Lagrangians, deterministic, athermal, and you can do stochastic, as well as you can do coarse-grained PDEs as well. So just let me show you how they look like. This is the case when you have a barrier between where the goal is, and then there is 1 degree of freedom in the athermal system, and you can see that depending on the nature of the changing the time horizon, the system develops curvature, which means that it's trying to go on ridges, and it's trying to, if you give more time horizon to the system, it will find a path which is much more suitable to get to that goal. This is how learning also happens, and this is how also somehow, if you give more path for something to happen, more time for something to happen, you will get a solution which is much more nicer in some sense. And then you have some example where if you have a graph of connecting athermal interacting degrees of freedom, and you ask them to go on a circle, if you have a very low time horizon, they will just go in a flat line because the system wants to kick in as much energy as it wants. And then if you go to some medium time horizon, it will shrink. It will use the path of the energy scales, and then it will develop some curvature, and then it will go on to the boundary. And then when you go on to some longer horizon, it will do the same thing. It will completely shrink and go to a ridge kind of a state where the energy scale is 0, and then it will try to go to the boundaries. And then you can also see the same kind of a ridge kind of a motion also on these kind of systems, where the system finds a path between these kind of ridges and then goes on to the terminal state. And these are the positions, these are the controls that you can see. So these are for particle level descriptions. Note that these, so when we were doing this in 2023, we had less amount of compute. Now we have a little more, so we can go up to like 500 degrees of freedom. So these were done before. So. Okay, so now we come to representative systems in software systems, which is Allen, Cahn-Hilliard, and droplets. So in Cahn-Allen, what happens is that the degrees of freedom don't move; they are static because there is no flux. So you want to go from some random configuration of patterns to some pattern H. H we were just using for Harvard. So H means this, and then on Cahn-Hilliard there is flux, so there will be motion of the degrees of freedom. So they move. And this is how they form. And then you have control of droplets. So you begin with some random initial configuration, and then you go to droplets condition. And note, if you look at I did not plot the error plot in this. They will show intermediate scattering decay that you see in glasses and all those kind of techniques. on those fields, and then you see this kind of two-step like behavior, which you can also see like when you had correlated motion of these droplets trying to come together here. So this is how this is done, and then you can do it for reaction diffusion systems as well. You can make the same in high dimensional PDEs, vector calculus, vector PDEs. You can make this pattern H, and then you can also do it for some phenomenological cell-fate decision making, where you begin with a homogeneous state of the cell field, and then you can make this into some different morphogen gradients in the form of some blue or red, which signify the nature of the cell type. So these are some toy examples that we did. So now, and the whole goal or premise is that if I increase the computational cost or GPU budget that I have, you can now do this for any kind of a system. Now, so I want to now summarize something because the math part is almost over. I want to tell you about the limitations. So currently not scaled to large number of degrees of freedom, as Suraj was talking about, and it should require large compute resources. How much? That should be less than the nature of the amount of compute that big companies need, because we are grounding this through physics methods. So what is happening here is that you have both the techniques of AI and physics working at the same time. And because physics is adding structure to the mathematics, because physics is compressed mathematical structures, you reduce the amount of computation you need. But then I do not have a ballpark right now as to how much you need. Now the achievement is this allows for automated modeling and simulations and control of observable spatiotemporal fields. So this is like an automated version of doing, so rather than a human doing it, I can do this on a computer. I can just press this machine and it'll work. This is analogous to AlphaFold, but for dynamical space-time fields. So in AlphaFold, you predict static structures. This is a dynamical version of that, and that's what it does. It doesn't require large volume of data to get the interpolation path, connects the observational path, preserving the physical and informational constraints, and this is interpretable as well. So an experimentalist can actually use it. That's the whole point. Okay, so now how do we do all this in reality? Okay, before, so I need to show you something. So I need to, somehow I was not able to put this on my PowerPoint, on my keynote. So I need to show this. What did I do? Okay. Can you see my other screen? Can you guys see my other screen? Right?
Yes, we can see the other window.
Okay, so this is an experiment that Jeremy Yoda at Princeton was trying to do. What they are trying to do, so you have a wound in the middle, and they want to accelerate the wound healing procedure. So if there is no perturbation, in this case, the perturbation is in the form of an electric field. So if you want to perturb the domain, if there is no perturbation, what is happening is the wound does not close that properly. So there is some inward motion, but the wound is not closing without any perturbation in the form of electric fields on the domain. Now what they did, they tried some ad hoc stuff in the sense that when they apply a global converging electric field, what happens is that there is rupture of the wound. So it does not work because there is some retraction that is happening at the edge. Now, and then when they apply some single pulse strategy, this leads to jamming of the domain. So now the question arises, how do I perturb this domain so that the healing of the wound becomes accelerated? So that's the question. So the question is, what's the perturbation field in space-time so that the wound closure is very fast? And why is this useful? Because there are a lot of companies like Johnson & Johnson, and as well as in some other fields, they care about the healing protocols. And then this is basically leading to like a functional outcome and through design of functional objects. Okay, so let's get back to the calculation. So what you have, the same kind of a problem, but this is in a thermodynamic sense. What you have is some kind of an objective where you want to penalize you have something that depends on the open area, and then you have some running cost, which is depending on the density, as well as some L1 norm of the U field. So, and then you have constraints, which are basically simple constraints in terms of the rho, the conservation of the density, and then you have some momentum balance equation. So what does the optimal control predict? The prediction is that you should pulse the strategy in 2 pulses so that the wound closure is very fast, and the wound, as you can see, when it's uncontrolled and controlled, the acceleration of the wound happens. And this is just the representation of this whole thing in a much more systematic sense. So there were 2 problems that we solved. One is like which is not experimentally constrained much. So this gives you a pulsing strategy that gave them as to they should pulse the system. And then when you put much more constraints of the experiment, it tells you how you should pulse it at 2 time points in space. And then you get the area as a function of time. And then you do this experiment where you pulse it twice, and you, lo and behold, what you see is that the pulsing strategy that these machines predict, that you should do this in the experiment. And this is how it looks like when you pulse it twice at some time, for some time horizon, you see that the wound closes much faster. So this is one example that we are trying to do. We did with people at Princeton. And then
can you tell us about how the cells couple to the electric field in the model? Where do we see that here?
But the coupling is for the U. The cells, because it's a density field, right? So it's this domain is made up of many single cells. But then when you coarse grain it, it becomes like a single density field, which is a function on a domain. So and then you apply conservation laws for them. So this is already in a limit where the cells are interacting. And then there is penalization in terms of the smoothing of the velocity, which is generally called the viscosity. And then there is a penalization in terms of the gradient of the density. And then you have some friction that comes because of the alpha times V. And then you have the perturbation that you want to figure out U such that this objective is minimized.
Sorry.
Okay, but you're identifying the, you're assuming a strict correspondence between the electric field applied and the force effectively experienced by the cell, right?
Yeah, so we are just assuming that this is in the low Reynolds number as well as in the friction, and therefore the forcing is directly acting on the. But then there is smoothing, which is related to this penalization of the velocity field, so that introduces the length scale and all those stuff. So this is just a minimal model that you can cook up because the experimentalists did not give us time to do the whole shebang that I wanted to do. But
so, I'm sorry, I just want to follow up again on this. You could, I don't know if that's the criteria, the jamming. I mean, essentially, it's, if you see herding of sheep, the success of getting them through a very narrow gate is essentially, relaxing and then chasing them in, relaxing. So would the jamming on jamming do it, or is that not part of the error criteria of optimization?
Can you repeat the question? Somehow I did not understand mapping between the.
I can see why you wouldn't. My fault. I'm speaking about the jamming on jamming. So is the pulsing a result of, you could have made the error, or the optimization or the minimization of the error, the jamming itself, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can. So the way this was solved is, Jeremy did 1 or 2 experiments and then the thing was not working. So I had to update the model or the objective many times so that this works. So there's a feedback, which I did not talk about, between the experiment and the calculation. And then I had to put in this, when you see the paper in the cost function, it has the retraction and all those density behavior kind of stuff put in.
See.
So to make that work.
The jamming is essentially implicit, not explicit criteria.
No. So the thing is, in this kind of optimization problem, like PD constraint optimization problems, there are 2 things that you can update in the model. One is the objective, and one is the forward model. So this picture that you see here, it's called the forward model, and this is called the objective. So the forward model is basically the physics of space-time that you think is present, but then you can also update the physics, or you can also update the objective. But because this can be done, because when you construct the Lagrangian, you have a single scalar functional on the domain. So either you put it in on the objective, or you put it in the on the forward model. There's little to do with when you do the computation. Mathematically, they're a bit different, but when you do the actual numerics, things can work out either way. So that's the whole point. Does that?
That's fine. Thanks.
In the same context, so did I understand you correctly when you say that the jamming physics, because the forward model per se doesn't necessarily allow for jam, it doesn't have anything about jamming in it, but the B of rho t, that's the one that keeps all things jamming?
Yeah. So basically, that's the whole point. Either you put it in the forward model or you put it in the objective, because the constraints. So at the end of the day, when you do the computation, you're basically you're trying to figure out a constraint on space-time on the whole domain.
Sure,
So
sure.
it can either be through the forward model, but then the forward model might not be completely known to you. So you put that in the objective as well. So you can do jamming and all this kind of thing. So you penalize the formation of densities in the
So
model.
can I rephrase maybe a point what I'm taking away from what you're saying, which I think is quite interesting, because one of the puzzles, as you already mentioned, is always how do you choose the cost function?
Yeah.
But maybe with what you're saying, there is that freedom is perhaps beneficial because we also don't know how to model things perfectly,
Exactly.
and so you can mix and match, and
Yeah,
so
exactly.
okay.
And you should also know one thing, that updating the model is very easy now, because of when you write the codes, you can now update the model. You can say the error to the LLM, and the LLM will update the objective actually. So you can also do that if you want. Rather than you using your brain, you can use ChatGPT to use your brain if you want. If you think like that.
Sure.
Okay. So this is a culmination of many things happening at the same time. This kind of numerics, this kind of computation happening, and there are several feedback automation techniques, and which the mathematics can be updated on the fly. So if you put all these machinery together, you can do these kind of techniques. Okay, so now this is another experiment that we are trying to do. This is not completely done, so this mathematics is not precisely written. So what you have is that what the experimentalists want to do. So this will be solved in a steady state limit. What they want to do is to make patterns. And how do they want to make patterns? They want to use RNA patterning using hydrogels. I am not going to get into the details of the chemistry. That's a completely different talk. So what they want to do is so what you have is a region of space-time. Just in this case is the space. What you want to do is to put in hydrogels, and you only have few number of hydrogels. You are not given many hydrogels, and all these hydrogels can do reactions which are 6-dimensional. So basically, you have a mapping from a 6-dimensional PDE to a 3-dimensional PDE, and then you want to find an optimization problem such that you put the hydrogels in a manner so that the pattern is best represented. So in this case, one is a galaxy that you have, and one is a butterfly that you have, and you want to make these patterns using these kind of numerical methods. And this is work we are currently doing, and this is currently the result that you have right now. And so basically what is happening is that there is a feedback between these computations and these experiments, and imagine the experimentalist has to do this experiment. So the number of degrees of freedom that the experimentalist has to figure out to make this pattern is very large, because let's say you have 100 hydrogels, and you have to now on each hydrogel have to report what should be the reaction concentration of each and every one of them. So it's a non-trivial a person cannot do this if they want to do this. And actually, Rebecca said when we were doing this experiment that without this computation, this experiment would never be possible. So this was one of a very big achievements that I have ever heard of from an experimentalist trying to say to a theorist or a computational person. So this is what the state of the art with respect to experiments is. And now I want to talk about how do you scale these Hamilton bridges and all those kind of things. One way is to actually use control functionals. So you know that control is a variational derivative of your free energy function, and a free energy functional is some kind of a mathematical object which is a mapping from fields to scalar objects. So now you can represent that object through graph neural nets. So let's say you know some part of the physics which is given through some physics priors, and some part of the physics which is not given through some known results. So what you can do is to parameterize the unknown physics or the unknown control through neural nets, and then you can actually make a machinery which has some parts of the physics and some parts of the unknown physics which is represented using neural nets, and you train the model such that the physics is now assimilated in the neural net, and then you can make simulations which just look like simulations that you would do on your computers. So you have this kind of a field, which is the curvature field, and then this is the density field, and they have a mapping. The density field comes in before, and then you have the curvature field coming in as well. And then you can do the representations of this in 3 dimensions as well. Okay, so this is some work that I'm trying to do. So basically the premise is, let's say when you know the goal, I can parameterize the unknown part of the physics using neural nets, and then that's how you can do complex modeling of the forward modeling of forward inference of forward processes in biological systems, and then you can actually augment that on a control framework as well. So so you should think like a loop within a loop within a loop. So if you think of the movie Inception, it would be like dream within a dream within a dream, or something like that. If you think like, something, yeah. Okay, so now I posed a question in the beginning. Can you create a computational machine which performs goal-oriented experiments in soft and active matter? The answer to that question, which I think right now, is yes, you can create it through creating a recursive machine, which actually updates itself through this framework of Hamiltonian bridges. And then you predict the experimental protocol the next, then you update the model again, and this goes on and on till convergence. Note, this is a thing where this kind of a machine has already being built in, if you think about in companies which are like isomorphic labs, which are doing drug design, as well as there's something called periodic labs, which is doing automated discovery of quantum systems. Okay, so this is what I had to say today, and then I have to thank some very important people throughout my life. I have to thank my undergrad mentor, Debashish Chaudhary. He was amazing physicist, and then my advisor, Dave Tirumalai, who I learned a lot from. Everything I know is because of him. And then about controls, I learned from Professor Bajaj. He's a terrific computer scientist in UT Austin. And these are some people who I worked with at UT Austin who shaped my understanding of physics and biology and everything. And then at Harvard, I want to thank Professor Maha, who gave me the liberty to work on this kind of a problem. And then CZ, who also helped me understand biology a bit more. And then Vishal, Aichen, and Al, who are terrific people. Al is an undergrad in applied math at Harvard. Is a terrific mathematician. Thank you very much. If you have more questions, I can answer.
All right. Thank you, Sumit, for a wonderful talk. So the floor is open for questions. Feel free to unmute.
I have a question if there is time.
Yeah.
So great talk. I was just thinking about biological systems more. So the basically process that you focused on, the wound healing process,
yeah,
I think works perfectly because you have this global electric field also. If I think about biology, a lot of processes can be done by local information. Like if I think about cells moving or folding, a lot of these information can be just locally tuning those properties. How can I think about like an objective that is global and pass down the information from some global kind of cost to this local level agents? If you can discuss that, that would be great.
Can you repeat this global and local question? I need to understand this a bit more. So you have a process. So process is always a spatiotemporal process. Depending on the resolution of that process, you can discretize it into subdomains. So the local and global is a word that is chosen because it always has a space-time domain. So if you can tell me in precise manner as to what's the time scale and the spatial scale that you're dealing with, then I can tell you the way in which you should think about the problem, actually.
Oh, yeah. So maybe just an example, like if I think about a bunch of cells connect to each other, right? Just an epithelial tissue. Then one of these U parameters, if I think about the model, could be a tension, interfacial tension between these cells.
Yeah.
That can be, if I add an objective, like my function can be totally based on, let's say you have an overall goal that the tissue gets to, a configuration. So you can actually write down what the goal is, and I can tune those U or the interfacial tensions based on that objective.
Yeah.
But in real systems, if I just look at this, how these U's are tuning, it's not exactly following a global optimization problem. It seems like
so you should think of these optimization problems not as optimization problems that biology is trying to solve. These are mathematical representations of problems that we are trying to solve. So what you are trying to get, so let's say you have a chemical, right? So in this experiment, right? How should I show this? So in this experiment, right? So when the experimentalists were trying to regulate the interfacial properties, so mathematically, when you think of it, you're trying to minimize the surface tension or something like that. But then when you're doing the experiment, that mapping is done through the cross-linker concentration. So the experimentalist has the material named which is like some kind of object that the experiment is trying to put in the system. So that is the decision variable you have. The mapping on the parameters is a very non-trivial thing, and then that has to be constructed mathematically. So this whole problem of global and local is a question that exists in evolutionary sense, but when you go to the mathematics, this is a different level of question. That question is updating the objective and the forward model. This can be done on the fly. So those are two distinct questions, actually. So if I make sense,
great,
as far as I understand.
Great, thanks. I think I'll follow up with you later. Thanks.
Yeah.
I think, I just want to also understand this a little better. You're not making any claims otherwise, but it's not all realizable biologically. Much of what, for example, in wound healing depends on cell adhesions, and you can only optimize or maximize certain biological functions or expressions. So you could get results, I think you're saying that are not biologically realizable because they're not within the let's call it the intelligence of the cells or the biological paradigm. I mean, is that not true? That just because you solved it, in terms of your various Hamiltonian bridges, it doesn't mean that it's a biologically realizable construct.
Okay, so there are two things. So let's take a biological process which is below the diffraction limit. So let's take at the nanometer length scale, and then the time scale would be of the order of picoseconds or something like that. So you have an arrow of time, and you have a process on some object, right? So you have some space and time. Is that so? When you have a cell, the behavior of a cell exists on a spatiotemporal domain. Is that true or not? Do you agree with that? And then, as an experimentalist, you're trying to perturb this system, right? You're trying to perturb this system such that something happens. Let's say the motor is not working, or let's say the cell is not working fine. Because a cell is an open system, so this mapping of a cell to this framework is a mathematical choice. And now that's not this mapping is a mapping of a theorist or a computational person. This exists. This spatiotemporal domain of a cell exists by itself. But then you are trying to do an experiment on top of it so that something happens. So this is a goal-oriented problem. So that's what. So if you think of a precursor of a cell, let's say you had DNA soup of DNA and RNA, and then somehow cell became something. So there was something added to the cell. That is some energy that you added to the cell so that it became to the soup, so that it became a cell. So that's a jump transition that you're having. So this, you should think of these bridges, Hamiltonian bridges. If you think in evolutionary sense, these are bridges which are transforming matter on top of each other so that you can go from Big Bang to what you have today. That's how you should think of it.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, per tradition, I will now stop the recording in case anybody was shy about asking a question on the recording.